Hello and welcome to the first Ask the Expert of 2021. Today we're joined by Wilco Fiers, Axe Core Product Owner at DQ. Welcome, Wilco. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Grace.
So the first question that I'd like to ask you, and I typically ask all of our guests here, is how you got started in the accessibility field.
I have been in accessibility for coming up to 15 years now. It is one of the first things I did in one of the first jobs I had was to get to do accessibility audits. I am visually impaired myself. I have been involved with blind and low vision community pretty much from birth. And that's kind of where my interest in the topic started. I saw how some of my peers had to deal with inaccessibility on the web, on various technologies. And I was involved in web development for a little while. That is kind of where I had my training. And so it's kind of a natural thing for me to go figure out what is this accessibility stuff about and how do you do it. So I applied to an organization in the Netherlands which does accessibility audits. And I did that work for about 10 years. So really, I started off just doing web development for a little while and rolled into accessibility fairly quickly after that.
Awesome. And so you're a member of the W3C's Accessibility Conformance Testing, or ACT Task Force, and also the chair of the ACT Rules Community Group. So can you talk a little bit about what you do in each of these roles?
So I am what's called a co-facilitator of the task force. Essentially, what the ACT group is focused on is consistency in accessibility testing. WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, have all of these success criteria that aren't the easiest things to test consistently. One of the things that most people that work in accessibility for a little bit longer encounter is that your peers will test something different than the way you've tested it. And that's one of the that's fairly frustrating. You want a result to be consistent. If I test something a certain way and somebody else using the same standard tests it a different way, that produces just frustrations in clients. Things need to be consistent. Things need to be accurate, reliable. Just kind of undermines accessibility as a field if the results we produce are inconsistent. So what the accessibility conformance testing groups do is they work out rules that can be implemented into tools, but also that can be used into testing methodologies to test WCAG more consistently. So we use these in Axe Core as one. We have a number of rules that are based on the rules in ACT and vice versa. There are quite a few rules in ACT that were inspired by rules that are in Axe Core. Other tool developers are also involved in that stuff. There's also methodology developers. So one example of a methodology is the Trusted Tester program, which is a fairly widely used testing approach for WCAG that is used by the US government, which set out to do a fairly similar thing to just get organizations to test more consistently. And the larger goal is for Trusted Tester and Axe Core and other methodologies. Like in Europe, there are a variety of these methodologies as well, is to get them to be more consistent, to align them so that the results you get from one or from the other are less divergent. So that's, in a slightly long-winded way, what the ACT group does.
Yes, excellent. So you're constantly testing and you're iterating on methodology and really refining, how WCAG rules are carried out. Is that kind of the gist of it?
That's right. Yes. So it's definitely, there's an iterative process to it. It's also, there's a lot of discovery in there too. One of the things that it keeps surprising me, I've tested it for WCAG for 14, 15 years now, and I have a really clear idea of how to do that. And I frequently still get surprised by other interpretations that other people have. Like, why do you test it this way? And then they explain it. They go, oh, right, I understand how you read this. I've never read it this way. And so what we're doing is we are, by going through these very systematically, we're discovering these areas where there are differences in how these requirements are being approached. And we're making decisions on, okay, so this is the way we can all agree on, this should be done. And then we're documenting it, we're formalizing it, we're publishing it. That way, future iterations, newer organizations, people that are looking to develop their own methodologies can see it and use these examples to be more in line with how this is intended to work.
Absolutely. And I think the interpretation of WCAG, and I feel like it really speaks to the humanness of accessibility, right? You can look at the same rules and have, 10 different people look at those rules, but 10 different opinions come out of them. And I just find it so interesting that, we can get so many different interpretations of it, which poses a challenge, definitely, but also keeps you on your toes.
It does. And in a sense, it's fairly similar to what you might see in legal practices too. There's lots of ways to read a particular text, but figuring then out how to do it the right way and how to do it consistently, because you don't want one judge to interpret a law one way and another to do it a completely different way either. It's that same kind of concept. It's figuring out how do you do it the same way across the world, really. That's kind of the goal.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. So taking a step back, talking about WCAG. So the first public working draft of WCAG 3.0 was finally released back in January of this year of 2021. So what does this mean for what stage WCAG 3.0 is in? And maybe you could speak a little bit about kind of where the process stands.
Yeah. So I've been involved in that work a little bit myself, kind of off and on. And WCAG 3 is a very interesting idea, but it is still also very early on. WCAG 3 is, like, even though it's been under research and in development for several years at this point, they are only now at the point where they're kind of defining the structure of this and looking for public feedback on it. I don't think anything in WCAG 3 in this first draft is going to be in in the final version of it. So it really, really is very early days. At this point, the group is looking for wider feedback. They're looking for, do people think these things are a good idea? What are the pros and cons of different things? Are there angles or approaches that haven't been considered? So at this point, it's really information gathering. It's, the group has done what it thinks it can at this point. They've outlined a rough framework of how this might be organized, and now they're looking for public feedback. It is, like I said, again, it is very, very early days. None of this is definitive. None of this is ready to be used. At this point, it's about the high level stuff. And the more this develops, the more things will be refined and the more usable this document will become.
Fantastic. So you recently wrote a blog post about what we can expect in WCAG 3.0, and you've alluded to some of these changes that, in the working draft right now may or may not be in the final version of WCAG 3.0. But can you talk a little bit about some of those differences that we're seeing right now currently in WCAG 3.0?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is on the outcomes. WCAG 3 has this concept of outcomes, which is related to the success criteria the way they are used in WCAG 2. As in, these are the fundamental requirement bits of WCAG 3. And they're quite interesting because they're quite different from the way that WCAG 2 success criteria work. I mean, WCAG 2, the success criteria were true or false statements. So you could, it would be a statement about an entire web page where something has to be true. So all images must have a descriptive text alternative is an example of a success criteria. I'm slightly paraphrasing, the language is more complicated than that, but that's what it comes down to. In WCAG 3, the outcomes aren't true false statements. They are a rating. You have an outcome, which is an thing that is expected from some piece of content. It's no longer tied to a single web page. It can be parts of a web page. It can be multiple pages. It can be potentially an entire website that is still open and something that still needs to be defined. But then an outcome has a score 0 to 3, which lets you grade how good or how poorly the content meets that particular outcome. So there's more granularity in that. So it lets you it takes you away from a single tiny error, means you don't meet the thing at all, to a thing that has more granularity in it, where there's more room for nuance. They have, in addition, added the concept of a critical error, which are the type of error that if you see that at all, you get a score of 0. So for example, if a button in a search field is completely inaccessible, that would be a critical error. Even if that is only one button on the entire page or on the entire website, you still aren't going to get any points for that. But the rest of it, the less intrusive things, are going to be graded on that 0 to 3 scale. That's one of the more important differences that they're doing with WCAG 3.
Awesome. So there's this introduction of more granular rating systems. And do you think that that is helpful in kind of really determining like a website or digital property's overall level of accessibility?
I think granularity can be really helpful. It's also practical. It's just going to be a lot more work. One of the things that we really need to be mindful of when we go to WCAG 3 is that we make sure it's all still achievable. If WCAG 3 becomes a document that is 2, 3, 5 times as expensive to test with than WCAG 2 is, then that's going to create a lot of problems. There's only so much budget an organization has. So if they need to choose there, they may choose to stick with WCAG 2 a little longer, or they may choose to test less frequently, which may result in just more accessibility defects going unnoticed for a longer period. So there's a trade-off there that's a very interesting one. I'm very interested to see how they're going to balance that, because granularity, the upshot of it, what it gives you is there's more room to say this website has improved. You're doing better than you did 2 months ago or a year ago. You might not be perfect, but it's doing really well. And that requirement of something being absolutely perfect is, people are just finding it too strict. It is, for many websites, not a good representation to say you're not perfect, therefore you're inaccessible. That's often not the way to approach accessibility. Like there's no room for error in WCAG 2, and that is definitely one of the good things about this model. It addresses that. But the question is, does it then make things too complicated to test? Does it make it too expensive? I think that is a complicated balancing act that they're going to need to work on.
Yeah, definitely. And important considerations, like you mentioned,
Hmm.
from an organization's perspective, is how to approach additional testing, additional rating
Yeah.
systems. And
Yeah, I would personally love for accessibility testing to be more accessible. I think that's one of the things that drives my work in Axe Core. I love the availability of it, the ease of it. I love how the open source component of it is one of the most important reasons why I joined DQ. It's because the open source nature of Axe Core makes accessibility testing a lot easier to do. I don't think enough people do accessibility testing. So potentially making accessibility testing more complicated, less accessible makes me a little nervous.
yeah, that's a great point. And I think that segues well into my next question was going to be about Axe. What are you currently working on in Axe? And is there anything new and exciting you can share?
I can't say much yet, but please do attend my XCon talk on Xlinter, because Xlinter, I think, is going to be one of the big projects in the next couple of years. So last year, we put out a prototype for Xlinter, which still is available on GitHub, where you would install that as an app and it would automatically scan all of your pull requests for accessibility problems. So unlike the extension where you have to open up the web page, click the analyze button, see the results, and then do something with it, this would run automatically every time you open a pull request with some more code, making accessibility testing that much easier. We are working to expand what we can do with that linter and where it can run. And I will be talking more about that in my XCon presentation. But personally, this is a thing that I have been dreaming to do for 3 years now. And I am super, super excited to be launching this soon.
Awesome. Well, we can't wait. And I will share a link to your AxeCon presentation, where to sign up for AxeCon at the bottom of the video here.
Cool.
Awesome. So what other developments in the accessibility world are you excited to see happen?
I am really looking forward to seeing where the Axe browser extension is going to go next. We have done a lot of work on the intelligence guided tests, which are another way to make accessibility testing more accessible. It is a set of tools that kind of guide you through the process of doing some accessibility testing. So it can guide you through the process of doing keyboard testing, for example. I think that is a really, really cool tool and a really, really great development. And I'm hoping to see more of that in the future. Another thing that I'm very interested to see is more work with machine learning. I think we've all seen this coming for a while. All of us that are in this industry, is that machine learning is increasingly becoming an important part in accessibility. Some of the browsers have done experiments with it. Some of the tool developers have done experiments with it. And it looks like it is going to go prime time pretty darn soon. Really looking forward to getting more involved in that myself. I think there's a lot of possibilities there.
Yeah, I feel like that's really consistent with the theme we've been talking about, is making accessibility more accessible. Why we're adding these layers of machine learning and AI, we can get smarter and more efficient in testing for accessibility, which hopefully that means it'll just become more present and prevalent in testing all around.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I think the normal tools that we use need to have accessibility built into it. Like our editors need to have accessibility tools built into it. The browser needs to have accessibility tools built into it. I think that's another thing worth mentioning. There's a great deal of things in accessibility that could be fixed by, for example, a browser. Browsers could, if they wanted to, enforce that the focus on an element is always visible. They never have, but it's an option that they could enable. There are other things like that. There should be tools out there that prevent screens from flashing too fast so that somebody can get seizures. That should just be in the operating system. There are a lot of things that can be done much better than we have been doing them. And I think part of that is because the focus in the industry so far has been on testing and finding problems. But I'd really love to see us move towards more fixing problems. I think expecting every single developer to know accessibility, to install their accessibility tools, to run those tools, I think that's a very high burden, and I think we can make that easier by taking some of these problems away.
Great point. It's really about going back to the source, right? We're talking about browsers, we're talking about operating systems.
Yes, it's the old shift left thing. We need to not fix the thing by the time it makes it onto the website. You're way too late. Fix it in the source code, or ideally fix it in the browser, fix it in the operating system so every browser has it fixed. It's those kinds of solutions that I think will really move the ball forward.
Absolutely. All right, one final question for you, Wilco. I often like to end on a bit of words of wisdom from our guest. So what's your best advice for someone who's new to navigating these often tricky worlds of WCAG and starting to approach accessibility testing? What's your advice for someone who's new to this world?
I think a really good thing to keep in mind is accessibility is a profession. Too often, people treat accessibility as a thing that you can just do on the side. Accessibility is a complicated topic. There are multiple disciplines within even the web accessibility industry. Nobody knows it all. So even if you get started, it's okay not to have all the answers. Be open to learn. There's a fantastic community out there that will help you and embrace you and will teach you how to get better at accessibility. There are fantastic resources out there. The DQ University is a really great resource. World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, has a lot of really fantastic resources. Look for those, learn there. You're never going to know everything. That does not mean you can't get started. So please do get started. It's great work. There's a wonderful community. It's really, really fun.
Couldn't agree more. Awesome. Well, Wilco, thank you so much again for chatting. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for your many words of wisdom on WCAG and AXE, and really looking forward to your AXCON presentation as well.
Very good. Thanks for having me, Grace.